Mercedes are being called the calm team in a wild new era, and that is exactly why everyone is nervous. The 2026 engines were supposed to create uncertainty, more electric power, new problems, new surprises, yet the paddock keeps circling back to one idea. Mercedes found something early and it still holds up when the car is pushed. Bahrain did not feel like normal testing gossip, it felt like a warning, because while rivals argued about rules, the track was already showing who could control the new power and who could not. Lewis Hamilton sits right in the middle of this storm because he is the clearest signal that something has shifted. He is not chasing headlines, he is chasing a title, and these new engines can decide races before the first lap settles. The big change is simple to feel even if you never read a rule book. With no MGUH, teams are fighting turbo response, battery use, and launch prep all at once. And the car that handles that cleanly becomes a nightmare to race. And that is where this story gets complicated, because the argument everyone is screaming about is not only about who is fast, it is about what is legal when an engine is cold, and what it becomes when it is hot. Rivals want the FIA to close a loophole, but the moment the FIA tries, the same rivals start pushing back, and the reasons are not what fans expect. The real story was never about the lap time, it starts at the line. In the first 200 meters, where Ferrari are doing something that makes the entire grid look unprepared. Lewis Hamilton did not win Bahrain testing on lap time, he won it in the first 200 meters. While everyone was staring at long runs and headline pace, the Ferrari-powered cars were ripping forward like the start lights were a trap for everyone else. You could see it in the way gaps opened before turn 1 even arrived, and you could hear it in the way rival garages went quiet. Because this was repeatable, not a one-off fluke. What no broadcast covered is this: the new engines have turned the launch into a weapon, and Ferrari looked like the only team holding it cleanly. During one practice start, Hamilton surged from deep in the order and arrived at turn 1, looking like he belonged on the front row, not buried behind traffic. Esteban Ocon backed up the feeling by focusing on the first 200 meters, and saying the key was how quickly the car responded when the boost was needed most. Even Kimi Antonelli and Max Verstappen were part of the reference points, because it was obvious which cars jumped and which cars hesitated. The reason sits in a simple trade. With no MGUH, turbo response and start prep have become everything, and Ferrari seem to have nailed the balance. But that advantage does not live only at the start line. It leaks into corner exits, traction moments, and the kind of short bursts that decide real races, not test headlines. Some cars are already dropping to first gear more often just to wake the turbo up, while the Ferrari-powered group can hold second in places others cannot, and that changes how a driver attacks the first lap. Now here is the unsettling part. If one team can look this sharp when everyone is still learning procedures, what happens to the teams whose new package cannot even stay alive long enough to gather data? Because the next story is about a project that left Bahrain barely running at all. Aston Martin did not leave Bahrain looking slow, they left Bahrain looking fragile. While other teams were chasing pace, Aston were chasing basic running, and the paddock noticed because the stoppages kept coming with no clean pattern. One night it was battery trouble, the next day it was more time behind the garage doors, and by the end it felt like the car was on a clock. When a project carries this much expectation into a new rules era, the scariest thing is not a bad lap, it is the feeling that the car might not even reach the first checkered flag if nothing changes. Honda's Koji Watanabe did not try to dress it up, he called the test extremely challenging and said a complex set of issues showed up that they now have to fix fast. Then Ikuotishi added the detail that changed how people read the whole story: abnormal vibrations and damage to the battery system caused by those vibrations. They even said they were using a special bench with the monocoque mounted to chase the vibration source. That is not fine tuning, that is survival work, and it points straight at the car and power unit working badly together. But here's what the paddock is not talking about. If the power unit looked acceptable on benches, then the real trap may be the integration, the gearbox, the mounting, or the way the whole rear of the car shakes under load when the new electrical systems are stressed. That means this is not only Aston Martin's problem, it is a warning about how thin the margin is in 2026. And right as Aston are fighting vibrations, the rest of the grid are about to fight something even nastier. A rule line that says 16-1 and an engine that may not stay 16-1 once it is hot. Mercedes are passing the FIA tests, Yet 4 rival manufacturers are still convinced something is wrong. That is the contradiction driving this entire engine war. The rule says the maximum compression ratio is 16:1, and on paper Mercedes are inside it, but rivals believe that number changes when the engine is actually running, when everything is hot, expanded, and under real load. They think Mercedes built an engine that behaves one way in the test and another way on track. If that sounds like a small detail, it is not. Wrong, because it could decide a season before the first flyaway even begins. Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and Red Bull fear a temperature trick, using materials and thermal expansion to push beyond the limit once the power unit is at operating heat. Some claims put it as high as 18:1, and the whispered reward is 1/10 per lap. In modern Formula 1, that is not a tiny gain, that is a straight line to pole fights and race control. Toto Wolff has stayed firm, saying the design is legal and approved. And that can be true if the test only checks the engine at ambient conditions, not the state it lives in during a race. This is the part that changes everything. The argument is not only about Mercedes, it is about the definition of legal in 2026. If the measurement point is wrong, the fastest teams will always design for the gap between the rule and reality, and everyone else will scream until the FIA reacts. But once the FIA reacts, timing becomes a weapon too. Because a mid-season fix can hand someone a head start that is impossible to erase. And that is why the next battleground is not the dyno. It is the vote that was supposed to close the loophole and instead lit the whole paddock on fire. The FIA tried to calm the fire with one simple promise: change the test and shut the argument down. It sounded clean, almost boring, until teams realized the timing could decide the season before it even gets to the summer. The proposal was to adjust how the compression ratio is measured starting on August 1st, with a hot check at 130 degrees as well as the ambient check. That means the first 13 races of a 24 race year could run under the old boundary, and nobody trusts what that creates. Toto Wolff kept repeating one point: the Mercedes engine already passes the tests, and it was approved. The data tells a completely different story. The rivals did not just want a change. They wanted a very specific kind of change. A hot-only check that would pull Mercedes back while giving them room to tune their own engines for cold conditions. The moment the FIA put both checks on the table, cold and hot, the move stopped helping the complainers. Suddenly, the same manufacturers who pushed hardest started hesitating because their own workaround would die too. And now the fight is no longer about closing a loophole. It is about who gets hurt by the way it is closed. If the rule must be met when the engine is cold and when it is hot, you do not just limit Mercedes, you lock everyone into a narrow box that only some designs can survive. That is why the vote became toxic overnight, because the fix turned into a trap. To understand why that trap matters, you have to follow the engineers into the numbers and see what temperature really does to compression when the engine is pushed. Mercedes did not win this fight by shouting, they won it by understanding what heat does to metal better than everyone else. A former power unit technical boss explained why the new test idea flips the whole argument on its head. What no broadcast covered is this: the same engine can behave like two different engines depending on temperature, and the rule only matters if you can prove it in a controlled check. Once the FIA tries to measure both states, the teams chasing Mercedes lose the one escape route they were quietly counting on. Here is the key detail. That engineer said an engine that reads 16:1 when cold often drops to around 15.2:1 when it is running, because parts expand at different rates. The conrod grows, but the block can grow more, changing the real geometry. The planned hot check involves stripping cylinder heads, fitting measurement tools, then heating the unit in an oven to a representative temperature of 130 degrees. A hot-only check would let rivals run high when cold and settle back when hot. But a cold and hot check blocks it. So the vote did not just threaten Mercedes, it threatened the plans of the people trying to catch them. If both measurements matter, the clever play is not complaining louder, it is building a design that stays inside the line in every condition, and that is a much harder target. That is why Mercedes stayed calm, because this outcome makes their head start feel sticky, not temporary. Now the story shifts to where these engine traits actually show up on track. Because some circuits will reward turbo response response, and others will reward straight-line power. Ferrari and Audi might both claim power, but they are chasing two different kinds of speed, and the calendar will expose it fast. A smaller turbo can feel alive off slow corners, giving cleaner throttle response and more confident launches, which is why Ferrari-powered cars looked so sharp in those start drills. A bigger turbo can pay once it is fully breathing, but it asks for time and space. And not every circuit gives you that. That is why one concept can look like a hero at a track with long straights, then look stuck the moment the race becomes stop-start traction. The number Ferrari did not publish was the one that mattered most. The first 200 meters keep deciding track position, and if a car wins that phase, it can control the opening lap, protect tires, and force rivals into early compromises. That is also why Lando Norris having a delayed launch in testing is not a small detail. It is a warning that some teams are still wrestling the procedure itself. Meanwhile, a Mercedes customer like Williams wants stability more than politics, which is why James Vowles brushed the debate off as noise that could fade quickly, because rule chaos punishes teams who did nothing wrong, and the championship thread is already forming. If Mercedes keep any compression ratio edge through the early run of races, they can bank points while rivals are still arguing about what should be legal. If Ferrari keep their launch consistency, they can steal positions even on weekends where qualifying is not perfect, and those are points you never get back later. Then you add Aston Martin and Honda simply trying to run clean, and suddenly the title fight is not only about raw pace. It is about who survives the rule era without losing weekends to confusion. That brings the story to its sharpest end, because the FIA are about to learn what happens when teams stop trusting the fix. The FIA thought they were stopping Mercedes, but they accidentally exposed what the other manufacturers were really trying to do. They demanded action on compression ratio because Mercedes looked too comfortable. Then the moment the FIA proposed testing both cold and hot, the room turned uneasy. Fix hurts everyone. The fight becomes fix hurts everyone. The fight becomes about power, not fairness, and that is when governing starts to wobble. Toto Wolff's position stays simple. The engine was approved, it passes the tests, and it remains inside the written line. Meanwhile, Red Bull's Laurent Mekies has been pushing for clarity on what can and cannot be done, because a new power unit project cannot be built on guesswork. That is the real danger now. If teams believe the rule can be rewritten mid-season, they stop designing for the spirit of it and start designing for the loophole that survives the next vote. Add the timing factor, with changes set to land deep into the year, and you get a points race that can be decided before the rule even arrives. And the sport still has to go racing. Ferrari's launch strength could win them positions before the first corner settles. Mercedes could carry an edge that nobody can vote away, and Aston Martin with Honda still have to prove they can run clean after those vibration and battery warnings. So the question that matters is not who complained loudest, it is who built an engine concept that stays strong no matter how the FIA measures it, because the next time the lights go out, the fight will not be in a meeting room, it will be on the start line.